Edward Hallowell has a phrase I come back to constantly: find the right kind of difficult. Not easy, because easy is boring and doesn't build anything. Not impossible, because impossible is demoralizing and produces shame. The right kind of difficult. And for your ADHD clients, finding that spot requires a very specific design discipline that most of us were never taught. Here's what I see happen. A client comes into session energized. They set a goal that makes perfect sense in that moment. They leave feeling motivated. And then the actual week shows up. The energy from the session is gone. The goal was built for the version of them sitting across from you, not the version of them at 8 p.m. on a Thursday after a day that went sideways. So they don't do it. And now you've got a shame spiral running before your next session even starts. The fix is not motivational. The fix is structural. You design the goal differently from the start. You design it as an experiment, calibrated to the week your client actually lives in, not the week they describe when they're feeling good. You build the backup plan at the same time you build the primary plan. And you tell the client before they walk out the door that adjustment is part of the process, not evidence of failure. This is scaled down experiment design. It changes how your clients relate to their own follow through, and it changes what you're actually measuring between sessions. When you call something a goal and the client doesn't hit it, what they feel is shame. When you call it an experiment and it doesn't work, what they have is data. That's not a word game. It changes the entire emotional architecture of what happens between sessions. Your client sitting across from you right now, they're resourced. They slept, they showed up, they're engaged. That's the session self. The person who has to execute on Tuesday night after a brutal day at work with a kitchen full of dishes, that's the execution self. You are not designing for the person in front of you. You are designing for the person who has to do the thing on the worst version of a normal week. So here's the calibration question you want to ask. Think about a week where things are harder than usual. Not a crisis, just a harder than usual week. What could you actually do toward this in that week? Whatever they say, that's your design baseline. Not the good week, not the average week, the hard one. Because if the experiment works on the hard week, it works every week. And if it only works on good weeks, you haven't designed anything. You've just described what already happens when conditions are perfect. A client wants to build a daily writing habit. You ask what Thursday looks like. They describe afternoon meetings, a long commute, arriving home depleted. You ask, what's the smallest version of writing that works on a Thursday? They say 5 minutes with a timer. That's the experiment. 5 minutes, timer, every day. Designed for the execution self, not the aspirational one. The scale is not the ceiling. It's where you start so you can build wins that are real. So you've got the experiment frame. Now you need to build it for the week your client actually lives in, not the week they describe when they're feeling optimistic in your session. Here's the design question I use. Think about a week where things are harder than usual. What would you be able to do toward this in that week? Not the good week, the hard one. That's your baseline. Whatever they say they can do in that week, that's where you start. You can always scale up later once they've stacked some wins and you both understand what their capacity actually looks like outside of your session. The starting point is not a ceiling, it's a calibration. Take the writing habit client. She wants to write daily. Before I build anything, I ask what Thursday looks like. She tells me back-to-back meetings, long commute, she gets home wiped out. So I ask, what's the smallest version of daily writing that works on a Thursday? She says 5 minutes with a timer. Good. That's the experiment. Now, right there, same conversation, I ask, what if Thursday evening falls apart entirely? What's the version that still works? She says morning before email. Now we have two anchors in one experiment. The backup plan isn't something we figure out after she misses a day. It's part of the original design. You're building the goal and the fallback together in the same breath. That's what makes it hold up when the week doesn't cooperate. Most coaches wait until the client comes back and says they didn't do the thing. Then they try to normalize it. That's too late. The shame has already landed. You need to deliver the renegotiation frame at the moment you set the goal, not after it breaks. Here's what that sounds like. You've just designed the experiment together. Before you wrap, you say something like, we're going to check this next session. If it needs adjustment, we'll adjust it. That's part of how this works. Not a sign we got it wrong. You say it matter-of-factly, the same way you tell someone the meeting is on Tuesday. It's structural, not reassuring. Why does this matter so much? Because your client has a history of setting goals and not hitting them. They walk out of your session feeling great. By Wednesday, the plan has fallen apart. By the time they sit down with you again, they've already written the story. I failed again. When you name adjustment as part of the design up front, you interrupt that story before it starts. You're not giving them permission to fail. You're telling them the truth. That the first version of any experiment is a guess, and guesses get refined. Think about scenario B from your training. The client says, I always feel like I failed when I don't do the thing. And the coach responds, that's what we're retraining. The experiment isn't whether you did it. The experiment is what we learn about how to design this so it works for you. That reframe only works if you planted the seed a week earlier, when the goal was fresh and the client still believed in it. If you wait until they're sitting across from you, feeling defeated, you're doing damage control. If you deliver it at design time, you're building a different relationship with the whole process. 4 mistakes I see coaches make once they start using this approach. First, you scale down the goal, but you don't actually ask about the week. You take whatever the client proposed, cut it to 80%, and call it calibrated. That's not designing for the execution self. That's just doing math. If you didn't ask what Thursday evening actually looks like, you haven't recalibrated anything. You've made a smaller version of a goal that still doesn't fit the shape of the client's life. Second, the backup plan gets tacked on at the end. The session's wrapping up, you realize you forgot, so you say something like, and if that doesn't work, what else could you try? That's a throwaway question, and the client treats it like one. The backup plan needs to be designed with the same attention as the primary plan, same specificity, same anchors. If Tuesday falls apart, what's the version that works Thursday morning before email? That's a real fallback. Well, I'll just try again. Is not. Third, you wait until the client comes back, having not done the thing, and then you introduce the idea that adjustment is normal. By that point, the shame is already running. The renegotiation frame belongs at the moment of design, not after failure. You say it when you set the experiment, not when you're cleaning up after it didn't work. Fourth, You spend 3 minutes explaining why you're calling it an experiment instead of a goal. The client doesn't need the theory, they need the plan and the backup. Use the word move on. If you over explain, you signal that this is fragile or unusual, and the client starts managing your framework instead of doing the work.